Hey guys, Jamie back. Let's get back into hierogamy part 2. So, golly, I mean we could take 10 commandments, 20 commandments, 1,000 commandments, but we've tried to kind of boil it down to 5 of the ones that have saved our asses the most often. And fundamentally, when you get into deep flow states, deep sexually charged flow states, it is quite easy to lose your bearings. It is quite easy for the agony and the ecstasy to kick you in the ass, spin you around, and leave you thoroughly disoriented. So what we thought we would do is just lay out some decent road rules. And again, these are in no way, these are not actually cast in stone. These are provisional working guidelines that we've only come to through missing them or ignoring them or getting it wrong. So with that caveat, here they are. The first is no new karma. And when we say karma in this instance, we do not mean squishy, new age, pseudo Eastern ideas of good luck or bad luck. We literally mean cause and effect. We just mean if you're in a hierogamous relationship, big, huge asterisk, if you are or if you're attempting to be, then we would propose that the singular reason to be in it is to burn through all of your shit. And if you can do that, you can get to clarity in a profound way. But it means not making more causes and effects. And we're going to get into this in a minute. The next is no bliss junkie. So yes, the agony and the ecstasy. The ecstasy is seductive and distracting and addictive. And it's so good that you may want to bail on other harder, messier things in your life. And we're just going to take a strong stand that that is not the point of this, and to stick with our ditch digging as well. On the other side, if there's no bliss junkies, watch out for the ooey gooey. We will also say watch out for the utterly terrifying. And do not flinch when it comes up, not if it comes up, when it comes up, because it will. It seems to be part and parcel with the good stuff. Next, pay attention. We described very briefly what a flow state does. If you guys remember that acronym STER, S-T-E-R, the R at the end was richness, information, richness. And in that white light, neck snapping, orgasmic release is quite often tons of information. And quite often it is, yes, about the perfection and the beauty and the love, and also about where we are absolutely full of shit, broken, banged up, or just plain wrong. So let us remember to pay attention to the gifts when they come and not skip doing our homework. Because ultimately, this is a practice that starts with information. We basically hack each other's neurobiology. We use orgasmic energy to create these white light releases. We catapult ourselves and each other to that information field. We see tons of information and possibility, and then we get to come back, and what we do with it is up to us. And we would just super duper advocate that the only ethical stance we're aware of for this is to treat it as an absolute sort of gift plus responsibility, and that we actually use this to mend, heal, stand up straight, open our hearts, live large, and do the work that we're here to do without hesitation or apology. So with that, we're going to take these one at a time and go into a little bit more detail. The first one is just to introduce, again, another analogy, which is think of your relationship as a pond. And most of the time, most of us, when we're creating new dramas, when we're acting things out, when we're hurting each other, when we're getting distracted, when we're engaged in avoiding or hiding behaviors, when I drink too much, or I jerk off to porn, or you're fiddling yourself to 50 Shades of Grey, or someone's having a fling or an affair, or you name it. When we're doing all of that stuff, the water that's on the surface of our pond remains rippled, and we can't see a damn thing in it. And it's only when we commit, back to this notion of just fierce and committed practice with your partner, when we commit to not creating more causes and effects, not lobbing more rocks into the pond, it settles out. And the first thing that settles out is the surface. And we can actually get to see our faces in it. Beautiful and rare. And quite often people get agitated, bored, distracted. They think this is nothing's going on, all those kind of things. Right at the moment, they could actually be getting really clear reflections. And then if you wait even longer, the silt, the sediment starts actually settling out of the water itself. And then we can see the bottom. And what's interesting is the first things we notice are those bright, shiny things, like those coins, right? And those coins could be new possibilities and someone else to date, someone else to sleep with, right? Hey, honey, I think it's time we open our relationship. I think it's time we do this or that, right? Or again, back to avoiding and furtive behaviors. And it's tempting, incredibly tempting to reach into that place. And we can tell ourselves a story. Well, I deserve to. We're in this postmodern, conventional, like choose your own adventure kind of lifestyle. I get to have the things I want. I just need to tell you about them. Cool. And that's potentially totally legit. And just know, every time you reach into that pond and grab one more blinky shiny thing, whether it's another person, whether it's a concept, an idea, or distraction, you've just stirred up all the sediment again. And you may or may not get back there. So in some respects, you could make a case that hierogamy is distinct from polyamory in the sense of just open and loving relationships in the chronological direction or temporal focus. Hierogamy is all about burning through everything in your past until you get to absolute clarity. Polyamory, on the other hand, arguably, is about generating new content and seeing if we can stay ahead of it. So what happens when so-and-so likes someone else? What happens when I go off with someone else? Can we process this? Can we actually get back to the present? Barely. And not be mad, jealous, hurt, upset, etc. When you're actually dealing with hierogamy, it's saying, doesn't matter which door we come through, doesn't matter what our actual relationship configuration is, but we are saying we are going to sit tight. Our goal is to burn through all of the baggage of our pasts to get to the present that way, not create a bunch of new stuff and see if we can unwind it fast enough to get back to the present from the front. So it's a temporal, directional thing. And also know that if and when you actually let that pond completely still and completely settle, then you don't just see what's blinky and shiny down there on the bottom. You start to see a few lumps under the rug. You start to see, well, what's that over there? And if you are fortunate and really attentive, you can gently kind of pry up that pearl of great price that's hidden down in the mud. And that pearl of great price could be anything, right? It could be your deepest core wounds. Maybe you had some family of origin drama or trauma, and it's still just shaping your life in ways you've never been able to put your finger on. It's shaped your relationships, it's shaped your career, it's shaped, all of that kind of stuff. And you've never been able to name it because it's just, you've always been running from it or masking it or covering it up or just engaging in a succession of relationships and no one around you's ever been vested enough to give a shit to help you go digging in the mud and figure it out. Okay. Or that pearl could be, this is my life's work and purpose. I've been hiding from this or avoiding it or taking half-hearted stabs at it. And it could be that I need to quit my job as an accountant and I need to paint big murals. It could be I no longer want to be a lawyer and I want to go and do aid work. It could be I'm done doing aid work and I want to go and make bank in Silicon Valley with this cool idea. It doesn't matter which direction it goes, and it doesn't matter what the category is. But it does matter that we don't get to those places of stillness and clarity to excavate the things that are most central to us, done or not done, right? Wounds or gifts, unless we let it all settle out. And there's profound value in doing that with another. So on the Bliss Junkie side, and feel obliged to do this, hopefully you guys have been having fun with the stroking practice. Hopefully you have had a rocking Freaky Friday and really enjoyed just making time for each other, relationally, sexually, just sort of have fun practicing. And just know that as you start layering in the more advanced techniques, you will knock each other's socks off as far as just baseline physiological pleasure. And so the question becomes, what do we do with that? And in mountaineering, again, I'll speak from experience, and it's always a good metaphor, but 70% of fatalities occur after summiting. So basically, and that gives rise to the notion of summit fever, which is that people get intoxicated when they're close to the summit. They have all kinds of ego-based dreams or fantasies about them standing up there and snapping a selfie, and they push beyond where they have any business pushing, and they come unglued on the way down. So the question here, and this is Ed Viesturs, is a great Himalayan mountaineer, has often talked about this, that summiting is optional, but getting back home to where we live, to where the people that love us are, that's mandatory. So we would just strongly encourage not to get distracted or deluded by the magic, because fundamentally this is very practical, technical, non-denominational juju, and you can make it happen. So we would just strongly advocate, put it in context, put it in service of your life. If you're using it as an escape from things that are hard, painful, scary, boring, you name it, stressful, blend it. Use your inspiration from these places, come back and do that hard stuff. Right? But do not camp out here, because it will consume you whole. And the cautionary tales is, there's a reason this stuff is known as the left-hand path, meaning like sort of sexual spiritual practice. The right-hand path is literally the orthodox or straight truth, the same way orthodontist is to straighten teeth. Orthodoxy is the straight truth. That's the right-hand path. Thou shalt and thou shalt not. And the left-hand path is, it's all good. We're going to embrace everything. And if you think about monastic traditions around the world, on the right-hand path, they said, what are the monks' vows typically? Poverty, chastity, and humility. Right? Because money, sex, and power are incredibly disorienting and distracting. So much so that most religious traditions said, don't even think about them. You will never get to God. You will never get to holiness or piety or whatever they were shooting for if you try and juggle those flaming hand grenades. And the left-hand path is saying, well, bring it, right? I mean, most of us are living the householder's path, meaning we've got jobs, we've got families, we've got careers. We're dealing with all of this at the same time. So throwing sexuality into the mix, connecting it to fundamentally a 21st century guerrilla tantra, meaning like we're just learning to just tweak the knobs and levers of our own neurophysiology to get off in massively powerful and interesting ways. Well, be warned, this has been tried before and it hasn't always ended well. So really ground each other, really ground your own reasons for doing it, most importantly, and make sure you're not trying to pave over cracks, pain, homework. All right, so on that note, to continue in the cheery direction, is this idea of conducting these practices over time will dislodge shit in your system, in your relationship. And rather than flinching, rather than saying, oh, I liked the ooey gooey, I love this wonderful hot sex we were having on Friday night, I don't like this rage-filled screaming argument we're having on Sunday night, what happened? We must have gone wrong. Well, no, you didn't go wrong. This is exactly what this practice will bring up. So please know that, and even just like tattoo it on your forehead so you don't forget, because we do forget, but we do this on purpose. This stuff comes up. And what else will come up is not only just biographical stuff. Strange things will come up. You may start feeling yourself experiencing or expressing things that are sort of about women in general, if you're a woman, or about men in general. In the depths of really profound sexual union, meaning we've totally had an experience of selflessness, you may sort of find yourself starting to sort of inhabit archetypes. And sort of things you've never seen or thought of before. It can be a little disorienting if that's not already up your alley. So the key is it's all just taking place in our mind. So don't flinch. This stuff comes up. We did it on purpose. If we just breathe and keep practicing, we can release it in those ways. If, however, something comes up that grabs you, it's a super old painful story. That both of you got your parts to play. You know exactly how this fight goes, and boy, you're just going to dive into it and wallow in it. then you're fucked. Then what happens is you go back and you lose the self-awareness that you were doing this on purpose. You get collapsed into that old ego-based narrative, and you sadly are going to have to wander through that, banging into each other, hurting each other, creating more karma, stirring up your pond, doing all that stuff until one of you remembers, oh, I actually did this on purpose, or I'm bored with this pattern. Some deeper part of me is just actually not that interested in continuing to play this little psychotic two-step. So that's the key. You can move through so much relational baggage doing these kinds of practices, provided that when stuff comes up, you don't treat it as my stuff, you don't treat it as your stuff, you just treat it as stuff. And clearly, each of us are playing our part in this drama or dynamic, but let's acknowledge radical responsibility. We wouldn't have this dynamic if there weren't the two of us that have co-created it. Even an affair, right? It's so easy for people to say, you hurt me, you wounded me, you betrayed me. Quite often, the person who engaged in that affair will say, well, you froze me out for 3 years. You were unavailable to me emotionally or physically or some other way. And there is absolutely a dialectic going on there. In the 2 to tango category, take that all day long. So that's the key, is just remember, when it comes up, we did it on purpose. Treat it as stuff, not mine or yours, which just removes the blame. And breathe. Fundamentally, keep doing the practice. You don't have to do all this psychologically. And you can actually flush a ton of this stuff by using psychosexual practice instead. And this, just to unpack this picture, this is from Disney's Sword in the Stone. This is where Merlin, who's currently looking like a little mouse there, is engaged with the witch, and she's turned herself into a dragon, and then an elephant, and then he turned himself into a mouse to scare the elephant, and then she's turned herself into a snake to eat the mouse. And it's fundamentally that level of shape-shifting. Of course, if you get stuck in one of those and you're on the wrong end of the exchange, you're screwed. But the reality is to remember all of them were just forms we were taking and movements we were shifting through. So if it turns out that something comes up where an old wound, an old pattern gets animated, know that you are animating past versions of yourselves. They're in the mix somewhere. They're in our cellular system, in our memory, in our stories, all of that. But it's not the same as that partner that bowed onto the mat, that tied into the rope, that committed to hierogamy together. So just remember, if you see an imaginary purple dragon, don't flinch, because if it chases you off a real cliff, it's 16 feet per second all the way down. And that's the distinction we try to make. A lot of this stuff will come up, it will attempt to grab us, and it will feel so real, and it's not. So breathe, stay connected, let it come, let it go. And on that one, there is a notion, simply that is, as I said earlier, that when we get good at this, we get pretty consistently able to catapult each other up into states of vast information richness. And you can call it what you want. Lots of different wisdom traditions have all kinds of highfalutin names for it. We're just going to kind of leave it at that. Call it the cosmic browser. And what will happen if you find yourself in some of those places of inspiration? It may come to you in the actual act of sexuality. It may come to you lying together afterwards, just kind of drifting and dreaming. It may come to you on a walk or a run the next day, or never. You may just, may not be there yet. If not, just put a pin in the map for this. But the question becomes, how do we make sure that I am noticing all that's being shown to me? And in that sort of not flinch category, treat it as information for growing. And you can always ask yourself that question: what am I pretending not to know? What am I pretending not to know? And at first, I almost always experience a little bit of like, oh God, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to ask that. What if something outrageous or dangerous comes out of my mouth, or something that puts me on the hook? But keep asking that question. Keep asking that question, and keep coming back from these practices, this is the kind of counterbalance to the bliss chanting thing. Keep coming back from these practices fiercely. It's like a wide receiver grabbing that football and just like you're going to get to the end zone without anybody stripping that ball from you. When you come back from these states and experiences, grab and protect the football. Do not lose the insight and the information that's been shown, because our experience, and the weird thing is we actually saw there was a wiki on exactly this experience through a different set of practices, but they called it a hyper slap, and they said basically it's the experience of trying to go back to the well, trying to go back to these magical non-ordinary spaces prematurely when you haven't integrated the lessons of the last time. And it was really funny for us because we've only experienced this ourselves personally in a sample size of 2, and then to realize that there were like hundreds or thousands of people around the world that had coined a term for it through a totally different mechanism, not hierogamy, not sexual practice, and were describing an identical thing about what happens when you just try and go back to this information layer, not having done your past homework. And it's generally speaking an ass kicking. So speaking of which, the French have a term that some of you may be familiar with already called la petite mort, which is the little death. And what it means is that at the moment of extended deep orgasm, that you can, in some cases faint, in other cases just kind of lose your connection to ordinary waking consciousness, what we've been calling the flow state. And there's something, beautiful and profound that can happen there. What we would propose is that those moments of selflessness are little deaths, and that they offer us a chance to radically accelerate how we grow. And they tend to only happen when we are willing to die to that present moment. And when we say that, it's obviously not the physical, it's the psychological. It's dying to our preferences, what else we'd rather have happening right now. It's dying to our past, the old stories, the old familiar threadbare patterns and dynamics. It's dying to our pain. That's a huge one. So often we cling to it, like these stored, like we're somehow, it's like Monopoly IOUs on little pieces of paper from when we were kids. Like we've got them in our pocket, somehow thinking one day we're going to cash this in and someone's going to give a shit. But when we get to these places of wholeness, fullness, love, light, and orgasmic release, you're like, who gives a shit? I am here right now in this profound perpetual moment. So all of those old stories no longer matter, unless I'd really rather leave here and go scurrying back to those places of contraction and suffering and resentment, etc. So fundamentally, you could consider that everything we're talking about going forwards, the practice of hierogamy, is a really super sexy and fun death practice. And if that sounds like an oxymoron, well, just trust us, it isn't. The idea here is that the sooner we are willing to die to this moment and every moment, the closer and closer we get to some pretty staggering and jaw-dropping spaces. And this picture here is a Tibetan nun in the center of a sky burial, and those vultures are actually circling because a sky burial is a nice way of saying when a monk dies, they actually lay out the body in this extended multi-day ritual, and they take incredibly sharp knives and they basically butcher the body and then feed it to the vultures. And that is their expression of, fundamentally the Hakuna Matata, circle of life kind of stuff. And on the one hand, for us in the Western world, it's pretty intense. When we were guiding in Tibet, we went to a monastery at 17,000 feet and got to witness the tail end of one of these. And it's, there's no question, it's intense. But in the Tibetan tradition, most of the point, arguably, of Tibetan Buddhism is to prepare yourself for a conscious death, meaning that if you can do all of the work, all of the meditation, all of the training, then when it comes time to transition from this world, if you can stay conscious rather than flinching, collapsing into some kind of animal body kind of stuff, then boom, bingo, you've won the lottery and you've stepped off the wheel of death and rebirth. So that's their perspective, that's their worldview, and that's the sort of software they're running. For us, we would say, hey, well, here's an opportunity. If you go back to that French La Petite Mort, the little death, and you realize that we are able to hack flow with each other in relationship in super fun ways, well, why not practice resurrection every day? And that's actually MacArthur genius Wendell Berry's beautiful phrase, practice resurrection. And so we have an opportunity to treat, this is life and death at the same time. It is a path that leaves us feeling deeply whole and utterly broken. It is a place that gives us information that shows us all the work we still have to do, and at the same time gives us inspiration for picking our broke-ass selves back up and doing it. So hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of a framework for where this can go, what's possible. We certainly invite you all to, if it feels right for you, and you may not be in the right relationship yet for this, and if this course simply clarifies that for you, please take that as a blessing and a good thing. Like, yeehaw, let's not burn another month not with our right partner. I also know there's celibacy. I also know there's polyamory. I know there's serial monogamy. There's all sorts of options here. But if this is speaking to you, and if this feels like, wow, okay, some of that might be interesting, some of that could be what we've been looking for, then we would encourage you to consider climbing that mountain. It's a beautiful thing. It's for all the marbles. It's high stakes. It's profound. It's not anything we ever would have imagined or anticipated. And it seems surprisingly easy to replicate, provided we handle those 5 commandments and don't do anything stupid along the way. So thank you guys for playing. Thank you for caring enough about each other and about your lives to give this a go. We hope that this has actually been okay for you, honestly. We hope that it has, not tripped some of the wires that more therapeutic or psychologically oriented or new age oriented couples work does. We hope this has given you some sense of just kind of a fairly straight ahead, paint by numbers approach that you guys can go and make your own versus having to buy somebody else's load or storytelling. And wish everybody the best. Be good to each other, and good luck.